what was my motivation for writing this book? So I have written a lot of books, yeah, and you could say they are all about Karl Marx and labor and digital media, because I'm interested in the analysis of capitalism in general and the critique of capitalism and phenomena of exploitation and domination. And I find Marx theory very helpful, and not just Marx theory, also parts of the history of Marxist theory, especially the tradition of the Frankfurt School, yeah, like Adorno, Horkheimer, Habermas, Marcuse, and others. And so I've used Marx in a lot of my books, really, and the whole tradition of Marxist theory. This book, Digital Labor and Karl Marx, was the product of discussion processes that have started in 2009, yeah, around 2009. Because back then, a lot of people were interested in how the political economy of what some people now call social media, like Facebook, Twitter, Google, YouTube, Weibo, and so on, how this works really. Yeah? And the notion of digital labor was introduced by some people in this context for countering the idea that corporate social media results in a more participatory and democratic culture. It was the idea that, well, these companies are exploiting us, and when we are users on Facebook and similar platforms, that we are then also workers. And there was a conference in autumn 2009 that Trevor Scholz organized at the New School in New York City. It was called Digital Labor, the Internet as Playground and Factory. And I was there, and a lot of it was a very large conference, a lot of other people were there, and what we were discussing there was really the digital labor involved in Facebook and other similar social and digital media platforms. And then in the years after this, I continued reflecting about digital labor. I was not just interested in explaining how labor usage of Facebook works, but I also generalized the phenomenon to other forms of labor involved in the digital media economy. So that's the background for this book. So digital labor is the key term here, and what I understand by digital labor are all forms of labor that are exploited in class relations that are involved in the production of digital media. And digital media here means both digital media technologies and digital content. They form a kind of unity, because if you think of the internet, then of course people produce some form of content that is digitized and stored on servers and transported through this information space. But at the same time, there are digital technologies. Yeah, there are laptops, servers, tablets, and other forms of digital technologies. So really digital technologies and digital content belong together, and the production of digital content and digital technologies within class relationships, these are labor processes. I also draw a distinction in the book between digital work and digital labor, because if Marx uses two terms when he analyzes capitalism, the German term Werktätigkeit and the German term Arbeit, which can be translated into English by Arbeit as labor and Werktätigkeit as work. So if you think of work, yeah, and Werk, it creates a work. It's much more a kind of creative and artistic activity. So really the term work, if you etymologically trace it, it goes much more back to a kind of artistic activity. Whereas labor, if you trace, and Arbeit and similar terms in other languages, if you trace where they go back to the term that stands for slavery. Yeah? So labor then is, how we should think of it, is automatically something that it's work that is organized within class relationships. So if we think of digital work, then it's the more general term. It involves forms of the production of digital content and digital technologies within class relations and also within non-class relationships, because not every activity that takes place in the context of digital media is something that has to do with class. A lot of it has to do is digital labor and takes place within class relationships. However, not everything is organized in class relations. So it's a kind also a kind of resistance to digital labor. That's how I think in basically about this distinction between digital work and digital labor. The book Digital Labor and Karl Marx is on the one hand a general theory of digital labor. On the other hand, it has a lot of case studies of concrete forms of digital labor. And what I want to show thereby is that the digital economy is connected to globalization and to the global economy. And there is what I call an international division of digital labor, where various forms of digital labor take place in different parts of the world. So there are different working conditions there, different parts of digital media production take place in different parts of the world. They are outsourced there, but they are all connected and work together. So if you think of the whole value chain or the whole a whole international division of digital labor, then the most foundational process are the minerals that are being extracted in order to create a physical foundation for laptops, mobile phones, printers, computers, servers, and the whole digital infrastructure. Now we know that a very significant part of these minerals are mined under slave-like conditions in Africa, for example, in the Congo, yeah, where there are slave-like working conditions, which just shows us that in 21st century society, slavery, which is a pre-capitalist mode of production, or a pre-capitalist form of class organization, it still exists. Around 30 million slaves still exist in the world. So they are violently coerced by direct violence. If they don't go into these mines, then they will be killed. Yeah, so it's the worst form. I mean, it's a form of exploitation and of digital labor where people are really coerced with guns and knives, and if they don't work in these mines, then they will be killed. Then, based on these minerals, also components are being produced, and these components are then assembled into hardware. So hardware assemblage is another very important form of digital labor, and we know that the overall majority of hardware that is being assembled is assembled in China. Yeah? In factories with very poor working conditions. So these are tailorist working conditions. And of course, what has become very well known during the past couple of years have been the very harsh working conditions in the Fuchs factories in China, where the iPhones and other Apple technologies, and also other computers produced by other IT companies, not just Apple, also HP, Dell, and others, where they are assembled under very harsh working conditions, very low pay, very long working hours. There's military drill there even, yeah. So it's very hard for the young people who come from, a lot of them come from rural China, yeah, and are migrants going to these cities because they cannot sustain their lives in the rural Chinese areas. So these are highly exploited workers. Then, when these technologies are being produced, they are also put to use. One form of digital media production or content production is software engineering. Yeah? Software engineering takes place in different parts of the world. Parts of software production has itself been outsourced by American or European companies to developing countries. The largest developing country that is exporting software is India. So India has a huge software engineering industry. A lot of it is being produced for Western corporations. So I think there is here a kind of imperialist division of labor, where Western companies outsource software engineering to India, because on average, the Indian software engineer has a salary that is on average just 10% of what a software engineer earns in the United States. Yeah? So if they outsource it there, they can reduce the wage costs and make more profits. At the same time, of course, there are also software engineers in the West. If you think of something like software engineers working for Google, in the Googleplex in Silicon Valley, for example, labor is quite different. Yeah? It's kind of play labor. So the Google Workplace, if you have seen images of it or videos, it does not look like a workplace really. It more looks like a playground really. Yeah. So people spend a lot of hours there. It's a kind of management ideology and managing strategy that there are restaurants, bars, free time activities, all organized within the Google Plex, because the idea is that people spend also their leisure time there, so that the boundary between labor and leisure becomes blurred. Yeah? But what Google hopes in the end is that these people will work longer hours, yeah? And that they will spend not just time at the playground there and with colleagues who are also friends for socializing, but that they will also work more, longer hours, and more efficiently. So it's a kind of strategy of what Marx called absolute and relative surplus value production at the same time. It also means that life becomes ever more subsumed under labor, and that what can be considered leisure time then stands under the instrumental logic of labor time. Really. So that's also one phenomenon that one can observe. And then there's also the labor of the users of Facebook, Google, Weibo, Twitter, and other forms of unpaid digital labor conducted on social media that creates, well, content, data, social relations. So this form of labor does not feel like labor. If you log into Facebook or Weibo, it's very hard to perceive this as labor. If digital labor, however, produces commodities that stand in the context of digital media and generate a profit for capitalist companies, then clearly, I mean, Facebook is an example, and other similar corporate social media platforms, they give users free access. So the platform itself is not a commodity. You don't pay for it. But what is a commodity there is the data that users produce, the user-generated data, but also a lot of metadata, their social networks, their usage behavior, and so on. And this data is sold to advertising clients, who in return for paying money get access to the attention of the users, to their profiles, and can present targeted ads to them. Yeah, so in the end, these platforms are big shopping malls. They are big advertising platforms, and Google and Facebook are not communications companies. They are the largest advertising platforms in the world. And the notion of the International Division of Digital Labor wants to show that all of these very different forms of digital labor are connected to each other, because the exploitation of these various forms of digital labor and their outsourcing and global organization within this network of the International Division of digital labor produces very high profits for a small amount of digital media and internet companies. Yes, so what we can see is that the corporate social media economy that is using targeted advertising, it's also contradictory. Yeah? And a lot of users are using social media because they have social use values that they attain by it. Yeah, they can get in touch with other people, they can communicate with it, and that's also the positive aspect of this economy. That sociality is really enhanced. Yeah, and so I'm not arguing for an economy without social media or in a society without social media. I think they have a lot of advantages. I think the disadvantage is that users' digital labor and different forms of digital labor are being exploited in order to enable these use values. But for Marx, there's always a contradiction between use value and exchange value. And what we must get rid of is really this contradiction, so that use values are generalized and that value and exchange value of the digital economy can be abolished. Now the question is digital class struggles, yeah, how can they look like? And a lot of it is already happening. One example is that a lot of people don't like the advertisement. So the kind of surveys and studies, empirical studies that I conducted myself have shown that actually people are very skeptical of online advertisement. They say we don't know what is happening with the data that we generate. Why should it be turned into a commodity? So more and more people now use ad block software. So what ad block software does is that it turns off the advertisements. But of course, if you don't see the advertisements, you don't click on them, which then also means that companies that want to make money by pay-per-click versions of targeted advertising or pay-per-view versions of advertisement, it does not work then for them, the mechanism. So it internally harms them. Yeah. So that's one mechanism. Of course, another mechanism is that there are people who try to set up platforms and communities that are not at all based at the logic of the commodity, where the idea is not to make a profit, but just to provide a social service for users. So these are non-commercial internet platforms like Wikipedia, of course, is the most successful example. Yeah? Wikipedia is not, it's not a capitalist company. It's a foundation that is non-profit. It's based on donations. Yeah? And the idea is also not that people compete there for something. It's more the idea that people create knowledge together and discuss how certain articles should be written, and that there's encyclopedic knowledge that is not sold to the world or to people, yeah, or that is not combined with advertisement. So nobody tries to sell you something on Wikipedia. It's the idea to offer encyclopedic knowledge about the world and about society on Wikipedia. Then there are also some alternative social networking sites that are more privacy friendly, that are non-commercial, that don't have advertisements. The most well-known of this platform is Diaspora. Yeah? It's a project that was created a couple of years ago by people who come out of the Linux and open source free software community. However, the problem that these non-commercial platforms are facing is that they don't have an income, constant income, because they don't sell anything. Yeah, they depend on donations or on foundation money, and they do not attract so many users. If you compare Diaspora to Facebook, for example, yeah, Facebook has over 1 billion users worldwide. Diaspora has a couple of 10,000 users. The problem is also that users are locked into the corporate dominant platforms, and their data is also logged in. And because they have so many social connections there and so much data in there, it's very unlikely that they will switch to different platforms. So one mechanism of how this could be eased is if there were a law, a data protection law, in the European Union, for example, that enforces that there must be data portability. So if you have your profile on Facebook, but that Facebook is by law required to enable you to put all of your data that you ever uploaded, yeah, and all your contacts and all your communications into a format that can be exported from Facebook and then imported into another social networking site, then it could be possible that you also, the kind of data and content that you have generated in over many years in hard forms or very time-consuming forms of digital work, which are also digital labor on Facebook. If you can take it into another non-commercial platform, then this would be an opportunity that this digital work is transformed into a form of digital, this digital labor is transformed into a form of digital work with a non-profit purpose, where all the negative side effects could also be avoided. However, the question is, how can we strengthen the non-commercial platforms? This is not already, there are no already solutions, and the alternative platforms are more struggling to survive, really. Yeah, and I think, it's a problem if if the whole internet is controlled by a small number of capitalist companies, because there is life beyond capitalism. Capitalism is inherently harmful because it results in inequalities, in injustices, and also in inherent forms of exploitation, as this international division of digital labor is showing. However, in order to enforce non-commercial alternatives, I think it's a task for progressive political parties and for media reform movements and groups. So I think what we must do is to make media reforms that channel resources towards the social media platforms that are non-commercial and that are not so well known, and not just social media or online platforms. It's a lot of problems has emerged from the whole commercialization of the media. So it's also a problem for journalism, for example, that it has to exist within a highly commercialized environment that is all driven by advertisements. So critical investigative reporting becomes very difficult if the media in which it is published are driven by advertisement. So my idea is something, as a media reform suggestion, is something that I call the participatory media fee. The participatory media fee is based on the idea that companies and private households should pay a specific media fee per year. This should be organized in a socially just manner, so that households that have low incomes do not pay a media fee, whereas those who have very high incomes can pay a higher fee. Companies that have large profits or revenues can pay a high media fee. Small freelancers who have one-person companies that have very low incomes, they should not pay this fee. So it would be a kind, not a flat fee, but a kind of progressive fee, because progressive taxes are always much more socially just than flat taxes. If the state, I mean, of course, this must be organized in the form of a law, yeah, and enforced by state power. So we also need political parties who can enforce this. Yeah? So my hope are the left-wing political parties, and there are some of them in Europe. I mean, who are in power now already. In Greece, there's a left-wing government. There's Syriza who's in charge there. Yeah? There's a very strong left-wing party in Germany. There's a strong left-wing party in Spain, Podemos, who might win the next general elections in Spain. So I think these kind of parties are the ones that are most likely to make progressive media reforms. If such a participatory media fee could be introduced, it would mean more state income via introduction of a media fee. But then the state should use this money and via participatory budgeting give it back to the citizens, who then would have a kind of public sphere check, a specific amount of money. Maybe it's £100 per household or per person per year. And then people would have to spend this money. They would have to spend it not by going into a pub and drinking beer with their friends, but by making a donation to a non-commercial, non-profit media organization. This can be something like Wikipedia, it can be something like Diaspora, it can be something like a non-commercial newspaper. It does even not have to be online. And what I'm expecting would be a flourishing of alternative forms of media, alternative forms of journalism, and of alternative forms of internet platforms. So it would result in more media, or it could be one of the mechanisms that could enforce media plurality, that could enforce freedom of speech, and that could help us of trying to find alternatives to a media world that is so much dominated by advertising and by capitalism and the logic of the commodity. So I think there is hope for a world for media and for internet beyond capitalism. Yeah? But it needs proper political support and political movements and political parties that make progressive media reforms.